The first time my father told me my younger brother was going to take over the company, I was sitting 3 feet away from the server cabinet I had personally spent 6 years keeping from becoming a very expensive paperweight. And the only reason I didn't laugh was because I finally understood that none of them had any idea what they were talking about. The conference room was on the second floor of our warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, and the air conditioner had been making that low rattling sound for almost a month. I knew exactly what was wrong with it. I knew which replacement part we needed, which vendor had the part in stock, and how much they were charging because I'd already called them twice. My father didn't know any of that. My mother didn't either. My brother certainly didn't. But there we were gathered around a scratched oak conference table that had been in the building since before I was born, discussing the future of a company that would probably have disappeared 3 years earlier if I hadn't spent most of my 20s quietly preventing that from happening. "We've decided that Tyler is ready to take the lead," my father said. Tyler sat across from me wearing a navy blazer he hadn't bothered buttoning, his sleeves pushed back just enough to make him look casual in the way he'd perfected over the years. He smiled when Dad said it, not surprised, not even particularly pleased, just ready, like he'd been waiting for the sentence. I looked at the folder in front of me. There were no numbers in it that I hadn't already seen. Revenue was up 11% over the previous year. Our biggest customer had renewed for another 3 years. 2 suppliers had agreed to better terms. We had finally reduced our emergency freight costs by almost 40%. The warehouse was running on a scheduling system I'd built after watching 3 supervisors nearly come to blows over delivery windows. On paper, the company was recovering. In the room, apparently, that recovery had happened because Tyler had become a great leader. "That's good," I said. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. Dad leaned back. "We think it's time for a more visible leadership structure. The investors want someone who can represent the company." "Tyler can do that," Mom added. Tyler gave a small nod. "I've been talking with them already." I turned toward him. "About what?" He looked at me for half a second, then smiled. "Growth strategy." That was Tyler. Always growth strategy, never the ugly middle part. Never the spreadsheet at 1:40 in the morning where you discover one bad assumption can cost $40,000. Never the supplier who calls because your company owes them money and they're tired of hearing excuses. Never the customer who threatens to move their account because a shipment arrived 12 hours late. Tyler liked the part where everyone stood around afterward and talked about growth. He was good at it too. I'll give him that. He could walk into a room full of skeptical people and leave them feeling like they had just met the most competent person they'd ever seen. I couldn't do that. I was the guy people called when something broke. There is a difference between those 2 jobs, and I spent years believing my family understood that difference. They didn't. Or maybe they did and simply didn't value it. Our company was called Mercer Industrial Supply, a regional distribution business my grandfather had started in 1987 with 1 rented warehouse, 2 trucks, and a handshake with a manufacturer in Indiana. By the time my father took over, we had 12 delivery vehicles, a 38,000 square foot warehouse, around 50 employees, and customers scattered across Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and western Pennsylvania. We supplied industrial maintenance equipment, replacement parts, safety products, hydraulic components, and 100 other things factories needed when something went wrong at 3 in the morning and nobody cared that their purchasing department had already gone home. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody put us in magazines. Nobody made documentaries about industrial distributors. But when a manufacturing line stopped, people called companies like ours because every hour of downtime could cost a customer tens of thousands of dollars. That meant reliability mattered more than presentation. At least, that's what I believed. I grew up around that warehouse. I knew the smell of hydraulic oil before I knew what hydraulic oil was. I knew the sound of a forklift reversing before I knew what the alarm meant. When I was 16, Dad started letting me work summers there. Tyler was 14 and hated every minute of it. He'd last 2 hours before finding a reason to disappear. I didn't mind. I liked figuring things out. If a pallet was in the wrong location, I'd want to know why. If a shipment arrived short, I'd count everything twice. If someone complained about a process, I'd ask what happened immediately before the problem. Dad used to tell people I had an engineer's brain, even though I never studied engineering. Tyler was different. He was magnetic. Teachers liked him. Coaches liked him. Girls liked him. He could walk into a room where he knew nobody and leave knowing everyone's name. At family dinners, Dad would ask Tyler about college applications, and Tyler would have some funny story. Then he'd ask me what was happening at the warehouse, and I'd explain that our receiving process was causing duplicate inventory entries. Dad would say, "That's good, buddy," and go back to eating. I didn't resent Tyler for that. For a long time, I actually admired him. He had something I didn't: confidence. I thought maybe we'd make a good team someday. That belief became one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did. After college, I had an offer from a manufacturing company in Cincinnati. It paid more than Dad could afford to pay me. I turned it down because Mercer was struggling, not dramatically struggling. There wasn't a newspaper headline about it. There wasn't a bank threatening foreclosure. It was worse in a quieter way. The margins kept shrinking. Customers were paying slower. Fuel costs were rising. One of our largest suppliers changed its minimum order requirements, which meant we were carrying more inventory than our cash flow could comfortably handle. Dad was 61 and exhausted. Mom handled accounting, but she wasn't trained for the level of financial pressure we were facing. Tyler had just graduated and wanted to join the company in sales. I thought this was the beginning of what we'd always talked about. Two brothers, one business, different strengths. I would handle operations. Tyler would handle customers. Dad would mentor us. Maybe eventually we'd take over together. Instead, the first year was mostly me fixing things Tyler promised he had handled. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. Tyler had landed a new customer, a machine shop outside Dayton. He was thrilled. He told Dad he had negotiated a great account. 2 weeks later, the customer's purchasing manager called me because the first shipment was missing 6 line items. I pulled the order and immediately saw the problem. Tyler had quoted the customer based on an old pricing sheet. The quote looked profitable until you included the freight and handling charges. If we fulfilled the order exactly as promised, we'd lose money. I called the customer, explained the discrepancy, and offered a revised delivery schedule that saved us enough money to make the account viable without making them feel like we'd changed the deal after the fact. They accepted. I didn't tell Dad. I didn't tell Tyler. I figured that's what being part of the family business meant. You covered each other. 6 months later, Tyler told a room full of employees that he'd worked out the Dayton account issue. I was standing beside the coffee machine when he said it. I looked over. He caught my eye and grinned. I grinned back. At the time, it seemed harmless. That was how it started. Little things. A customer would compliment a delivery process I'd built, and Tyler would say, "Yeah, we've been tightening that up." Out-of-biz supplier would thank us for the new payment schedule I'd negotiated, and Tyler would tell Dad, "The strategy is working." I never corrected him. That was my mistake. The first major crisis came in November of 2019. Our largest customer, Midwest Fabrication, represented nearly 14% of our annual revenue. They were unhappy because we'd missed 3 delivery windows in 6 weeks. The problem wasn't our drivers, it was scheduling. We were manually coordinating deliveries through a combination of emails, phone calls, handwritten notes, and an Excel sheet that had been copied so many times nobody knew which version was current. Midwest's operations manager called Dad and said they were moving half their business to a competitor unless we fixed the problem. Dad came into my office after lunch and shut the door. "Can you do something?" he asked. "Maybe." That's not what I asked. I looked at him. "Yes, but I need access to everyone's schedules. Do it." I spent the next 3 weeks building a delivery allocation system. Nothing fancy, no Silicon Valley nonsense. It was a practical scheduling framework that accounted for vehicle capacity, driver hours, customer priority, geographic zones, and delivery windows. I interviewed every driver. I sat with dispatch. I followed 2 routes myself. I discovered that one of our worst recurring delays came from a customer whose loading dock routinely took 45 minutes longer than they claimed. Once I built that into the schedule, the whole system started behaving differently. By January, our on-time delivery rate had climbed dramatically. Midwest restored the business they'd threatened to move. Dad was relieved. Tyler was the one who stood beside him when Midwest's operations manager came to the warehouse and complimented us. "We've really changed the way we manage logistics," Tyler said. The man nodded. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I was standing 10 feet away. Tyler didn't look at me. I didn't say anything. Later that evening, Dad walked into my office. "Good work," he said. 2 words. I smiled. "Thanks." I should have said something then. I didn't. I kept telling myself recognition wasn't the point. The business was alive. Employees still had jobs. Dad wasn't losing sleep over payroll. That should have been enough. And honestly, for a while, it was. Then came the supplier crisis. In 2020, one of our largest component suppliers suddenly changed its credit policy. We had 30 days to pay invoices instead of 60. That difference nearly killed us. We had millions in annual revenue, but nowhere near millions in cash sitting around. Our customers were paying us in 45 to 60 days. The supplier wanted money in 30. I spent 2 weeks calling alternative suppliers. Most wanted higher prices. One wanted payment in advance. Another couldn't guarantee volume. Finally, I found a manufacturer in Illinois willing to give us 45-day terms if we committed to a minimum annual purchase and provided better order forecasting. I built a forecast model using our previous 18 months of purchasing data. It wasn't glamorous, it was just accurate. We signed the agreement. The improved pricing saved us roughly $180,000 over the following year. Tyler later mentioned at dinner that he'd opened up a new supplier relationship in Illinois. Mom smiled proudly. Dad raised his glass. I sat there eating chicken and thought about correcting him. Instead, I asked for the mashed potatoes. That night, I went back to the warehouse because one of the loading doors had jammed. I spent 40 minutes with a flashlight and a socket wrench fixing something nobody would remember tomorrow. That's what my life had become. Tyler got applause for opening doors. I fixed the hinges. The strange thing was that I wasn't angry yet. I was tired. There is a difference. Anger gives you energy. Tiredness convinces you that correcting people isn't worth the effort. By 2021, the company had stabilized. Revenue was climbing. We had fewer emergency shipments. Inventory turns improved. Our gross margin wasn't spectacular, but it was healthy enough to keep reinvesting. I started documenting processes because I knew the business couldn't depend on one person remembering everything. I created vendor scorecards. I standardized purchasing approvals. I built a system for tracking customer-specific pricing exceptions. I documented which customers required special packaging, which suppliers were flexible on payment terms, and which contracts contained unusual delivery obligations. Most of those details lived inside my head before that. I knew that was dangerous. Tyler thought documentation was boring. Nobody reads that stuff, he told me once. They will when somebody screws something up, I said. He laughed. You're always preparing for disaster, I shrugged. That's because disasters are expensive. He slapped my shoulder. That's why we need you. I remember that sentence because years later I realized how perfectly it captured the problem. They needed me, they just didn't want to value me. Tyler's public reputation kept growing. He was good with investors. When we brought in a small outside investment group to help finance expansion, Tyler was the one who made the presentations. I prepared the numbers. He presented them. I wrote the operational assumptions. He explained the strategy. I built the forecasts. He answered questions about growth. At first, I didn't mind. Public speaking wasn't my thing. If Tyler wanted to stand at the front of the room, fine. But then he started changing the language. My inventory reduction program became our strategic inventory initiative. My supplier renegotiation became our procurement transformation. The delivery system became our logistics modernization. Nobody was technically lying. That's what made it difficult. Every sentence contained just enough truth to be defensible. Tyler was part of the company. He had contributed. He had brought in customers. He had relationships I didn't have. But there was a difference between contributing and quietly absorbing someone else's work into your own story. I began noticing it in meetings. An investor would ask, "How did you reduce freight costs?" Tyler would answer, "We changed the routing strategy." An employee would say, "The routing model that Mark built?" Tyler would glance at me. "Mark helped with implementation." I would say nothing. Eventually, even employees stopped knowing what I'd actually done. That's when it started bothering me. One afternoon, our warehouse manager, Denise Holloway, came into my office holding a printed report. Denise had worked for Mercer for 22 years. She'd known me since I was a teenager. "You see this?" she asked. "Yeah. It says Tyler designed the new receiving workflow." I looked at the report. It was part of an internal operations presentation. My name wasn't anywhere on it. "He didn't design it," Denise said. "I know." She looked at me. "Are you going to say something?" I stared at the report. "Probably not." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I don't want this to become a fight." Denise folded her arms. "It already is." I didn't have an answer. She left. That evening I went home and opened the original files. My name was on everything. The timestamps were there, the drafts were there, the emails were there. I could prove I had created the system, but proving something and wanting to prove something are different. I still wanted to believe my family would eventually see it. Maybe that was the part of me that was still 16 years old, standing in the warehouse while Dad explained to Tyler how important it was to learn the business. Maybe I was waiting for somebody to notice that I had never stopped learning. The family dynamic made confrontation even harder. My parents weren't cruel. That's important. If they had been cruel, leaving would have been easy. They were loving in many ways. They paid for my college, they helped me use my first apartment, they supported both of us. They also had a strange blind spot when it came to Tyler. He was the charismatic son, the one who could make them laugh, the one who brought people into the room. I was the dependable son, the one who could be trusted with a crisis. Somehow, being dependable became a reason to overlook me. Mom would say things like, "You know Tyler really looks up to you." Dad would say, "You two balance each other out." If I raised a concern about Tyler, Dad would immediately assume I was being too critical. "He's learning," he'd say. "So am I," I'd answer. "You're different," he'd say. I eventually realized that different was family shorthand for we expect less emotional maintenance from you. Tyler could be angry, ambitious, insecure, loud, frustrated, demanding. Everyone accommodated him. If I was upset, I was expected to be reasonable. That expectation followed me into the company. When Tyler missed a meeting, Dad would say he was overwhelmed. When I missed one because I was fixing a customer crisis, nobody mentioned it. When Tyler closed a new account, we celebrated. When I prevented an existing account from leaving, we called it Tuesday. Then came the investor pressure. By early 2023, the company had grown enough that our outside investors wanted a clearer leadership structure. We were no longer a tiny family operation where Dad could personally approve every major decision. They wanted defined responsibilities, measurable management roles, and a succession plan. I thought this was finally going to be the moment when everything became obvious. I'd spent years building the systems. I understood the employees, I knew the vendors, I knew the contracts, I knew where the company's weaknesses were. Tyler had relationships and presentation skills. Great. Give him sales and external relations. Give me operations and strategy. Together, we could make it work. I actually wrote a proposal outlining exactly that. I spent a weekend on it. I created an organizational structure that separated operational management from business development. I included responsibilities, reporting lines, performance metrics, and a transition plan for Dad. I emailed it to my parents and Tyler on Monday morning. Tyler replied first. "Looks good. Let's discuss." We discussed it 3 days later. I walked into the conference room expecting a normal meeting. Instead, Tyler arrived with a consultant. His name was Richard Cole. I knew him vaguely. He'd advised our investors on another company. Richard had a thick folder and the expression of a man who had already made up his mind. "We've been looking at leadership models," Tyler said. "And?" I asked. He leaned back. "I think the company needs one person at the top." "Okay. And I think that should be me." I waited for Dad to respond. He didn't. Mom looked at her hands. Richard cleared his throat. "The investors have expressed concern about fragmented leadership." "Our leadership isn't fragmented," I said. "I'm responsible for operations. Tyler handles sales." Richard nodded. "That's one way to structure it. It's the structure that's worked." Tyler smiled. It worked because Dad was still the final decision maker. And now we need a more modern structure." I looked at Dad. "Did the investors say they wanted Tyler specifically?" Dad hesitated. It was barely a second, but I saw it. "They want someone with strong external leadership capability," he said. Tyler's eyes moved toward me. "That's me." "And what exactly do you think I've been doing?" I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Richard finally said, "Mark, your operational contribution is significant." Contribution. There it was again. A word that made 6 years sound like an afternoon task. Significant, I repeated. "Yes." Tyler leaned forward. "Nobody is taking that away from you. You're taking the company away from me." He shook his head. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "It's leadership." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. "Leadership," I said. "Okay." Dad frowned. "Don't make this personal." That sentence landed harder than anything Tyler had said, because I suddenly understood that everyone in that room knew this was personal. They simply didn't want me to call it that. The meeting ended without a decision, at least officially. Unofficially, the decision had already been made. I could feel it. Over the next month, Tyler became increasingly visible. He started attending every investor call. He began sending weekly leadership updates to employees. He redesigned the company presentation. He added his photograph to the front page. My name was nowhere. I asked him about it once. "We need a consistent message," he said. "What message?" "Leadership." "Meaning you?" "Meaning the company needs a face." I stared at him. "It already has one." He smiled. Dad's face isn't exactly the future. I walked away. I should have confronted him. Instead, I went back to work. That's the pattern I can't escape when I look back. Every time I had a chance to fight for myself, I chose the business instead. I fixed a contract. I solved a warehouse problem. I trained a new purchasing manager. I renegotiated insurance. I reviewed a customer renewal. I convinced a supplier not to tighten our credit terms. I kept doing the work. Tyler kept collecting the narrative. Then one Thursday afternoon, Denise called me into her office. She shut the door. I heard something. What? They're changing your role. I stared at her. Who told you? HR. What change? She hesitated. Unho change. She hesitated. You're being moved out of executive operations. My stomach tightened. To what? Senior operations advisor. I almost laughed. That's not a real job. It comes with a salary. That's not a real job. It comes with a salary. That's not what I asked. She looked uncomfortable. Tyler will have final authority over operations. I sat down. For the first time in years, I didn't know what problem I was supposed to solve. Denise sat across from me. You need to fight this. I looked at her. I don't think they're asking. Then make them ask. I shook my head. It's already decided. She stared at me for a long moment. You're really going to let them do this? I didn't answer. That evening, I went home early. I sat in my apartment with the lights off and opened the proposal I'd written months earlier. I read it again. It was good. Not perfect, but good. The structure made sense. The responsibilities were clear. The transition was reasonable. It would have protected the company. Tyler had ignored it. My parents had ignored it. The investors had apparently never seen it. I started going through old files, not looking for revenge, just trying to understand where I had misread everything. I opened the delivery system documentation, my name, the supplier contracts, my emails, the customer recovery plan, my notes, the inventory model, my spreadsheets, the warehouse process, my revisions, page after page after page. There it all was. Years of work that had seemed invisible because I had never bothered to point at it. I realized something that night that I wish I'd understood much earlier. People don't automatically know what you sacrifice for them. Sometimes they don't even want to know. They prefer the version of history that makes everyone comfortable. Tyler's version was comfortable. He was the leader. Dad was the founder. Mom was the steady financial backbone. I was the guy in the background who helped. It was simple, clean, and completely wrong. The next morning, my father called me. Come by the office at 9. I went. My parents and Tyler were waiting in the same conference room where we'd first discussed the leadership structure. There was another folder on the table. Dad looked tired. We've made a decision. I sat down. Okay, Tyler will become president of Mercer Industrial Supply effective next month. I looked at Tyler, he nodded, and you will transition into a senior advisory role. For how long? Indefinitely. I opened the folder. There was a compensation proposal. It was generous enough to make leaving look irrational. That was probably the point. In my ownership? I asked. Dad looked at Mom. We're restructuring the shares, meaning you'll retain the minority interest. How minority? He told me. I stared at the number. I had spent years assuming that if the company ever became valuable, I'd be part of that future. Now they were offering me a slice of something I had helped preserve while giving control to the person who had spent years presenting my work as his own. Tyler leaned forward. This is a good thing, Mark. I looked at him. For who? He sighed. For everyone. Mom reached across the table. Please don't make this about recognition. I pulled my hand back before she could touch it. What do you think it's about? She looked hurt. We love you. I know. Then why are you acting like we're betraying you? I looked at my father. He couldn't meet my eyes. That told me more than any speech could have. I closed the folder. When did you decide? Dad finally looked up. A few weeks ago. And you didn't tell me. We wanted to make sure everything was settled. I nodded slowly. Then I looked at Tyler. Do you believe you built this? His expression changed. Just slightly. I believe I've helped build it. That's not what I asked. He leaned back. I don't know what answer you want. The truth. He smiled without humor. The truth is that I've spent years growing this company while you spent years making sure it could operate. I stared at him. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Because in his mind, those were different accomplishments. He believed growth was the company. Operations were just the machinery underneath it. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. Dad said my name. I stopped at the door. For a second, I thought he might change his mind. I thought he might say something simple. Something like, "We couldn't have done this without you." Instead, he said, "You should be proud of your brother." I looked back at him, then at Mom, then at Tyler. 3 people I had spent years protecting from problems they never even knew existed. 3 people who had just told me, in different ways, that the work I had done belonged to the company, but the credit belonged to someone else. I nodded once. "I am," I said. And that was the moment I stopped being angry with Tyler, because I finally understood that the person I had been fighting to be recognized by wasn't Tyler. It was my family, and they had already chosen him. The strange thing about leaving a family business is that nobody understands what you're actually leaving behind. They think you're leaving a building, a paycheck, a title, a desk. They don't understand that you're leaving 1,000 tiny habits you built around other people's emergencies. For the first week after the announcement, I still woke up at 5:30 every morning. I'd reach for my phone before I was fully awake, expecting messages from drivers, warehouse supervisors, customers, or suppliers. Then I'd remember that none of it was mine anymore. My access hadn't technically been removed yet, but my authority had. That distinction mattered. People still called me because they didn't know who else to call, but every time they did, I had to decide whether answering would make me a responsible employee again. On Monday morning, our purchasing manager, Kevin, called me about a supplier that had suddenly changed the lead time on a critical hydraulic component. "Tyler knows about it," Kevin said. "He said he'll handle it." "Then let him handle it." Kevin went quiet. "You sure?" "Yeah." "Okay." He hung up. 20 minutes later, Tyler called. "Did Kevin talk to you?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "He told me about the lead time issue." "What did you tell him? That you're handling it?" There was silence. "Mark, you know the supplier. You know them too." "Not like you do." I leaned back in my chair. "That's kind of the point," he exhaled. "This doesn't have to be weird." "I'm not making it weird. You're acting like you're trying to prove something." I almost laughed. "I'm doing exactly what you wanted." "What does that mean?" "You're running operations now." He didn't answer. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll handle it." I put the phone down and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. It was tiny, almost insignificant, but it was there. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of problems before anyone else even knew they existed. Now, for the first time, I was allowed to let someone else carry them. I thought I would feel useless. Instead, I felt lighter. The following Friday, Dad called me. "How's everything going?" "Fine." "You heard about the hydraulic issue?" "Yes." "Tyler resolved it?" "Good." Another pause. "He got them to hold the old pricing." I smiled. "That's good." "You sound surprised." "I'm not. He's doing well." "I hope so." Dad's voice hardened slightly. "I need you to support him." "I'm not doing anything else." "You're his brother." "I know." "Then act like it." I looked out my window at the parking lot below. "Dad, I am acting like his brother. I'm not acting like his employee." He didn't say anything for several seconds. "You could make this easier." "I already made it easy." "I left." "You haven't left." "You haven't left." "You haven't." "You still have your ownership. You're still involved." "Then tell me what involved means." He couldn't. Neither could I. I ended the call. The next month was almost boring. That was what surprised me. I had expected some dramatic collapse. Instead, Mercer kept moving. Tyler sent out an internal announcement about the leadership transition. The language was polished. He thanked my father for building the company and talked about a new era of disciplined growth. My role was described as supporting the transition and advising leadership as needed. I wasn't mentioned by name until the final paragraph. Then there was a company dinner. I almost didn't go. Mom insisted. It's important. So I went. Tyler gave a speech. He talked about the company surviving difficult years, becoming more efficient, and preparing for expansion. He talked about vision. He talked about culture. He talked about the future. People applauded. I sat at the end of the table and watched employees I had personally trained clap for a man who had never once asked them how the receiving schedule actually worked. I didn't blame them. They believed what they had been told. When Tyler finished, he raised his glass. "To the next chapter." Everyone drank. I lifted my glass too. Not because I was celebrating, because I was done explaining. 3 months later, I accepted a consulting contract with a manufacturing company in Cleveland. It came through a former Mercer customer named Alan Reeves. Alan had been one of the few people who knew exactly what I did because he'd called me during enough emergencies to understand. "You want to help us clean up our purchasing process?" he asked. "I can." "You available?" "Yeah." "Full-time?" "No." "Good. We don't need another employee. We need somebody who knows how to fix things. I laughed. That's probably the nicest description I've heard lately. The contract was small, 6 months. No office, no staff. I worked out of my apartment, coffee shops, and occasional client offices. The first invoice I sent felt strangely satisfying. It wasn't much money compared with what I had earned at Mercer, but nobody had given me the work because I was somebody's son. They had hired me because I knew what I was doing. That mattered more than I expected. I started taking on other projects. A distributor in Indianapolis wanted help restructuring inventory. A manufacturer in Toledo needed someone to review supplier agreements. A commercial equipment company in Kentucky needed help with warehouse scheduling. None of it made me rich. Some months were better than others. There were weeks when I wondered whether I'd made a mistake. But every project gave me something Mercer never had, a clean boundary between what I did and what someone else claimed I did. Meanwhile, Mercer seemed fine. Tyler posted pictures from trade conferences. He announced 2 new accounts. Dad sent me an occasional text about strong momentum. Mom sent photos from family dinners. Tyler looked happy. I told myself that was good. Then small things started happening. The first was a call from a former supplier named Frank. He didn't usually call me socially. "How's retirement?" he joked. "I'm 34. Retirement from Mercer then. Fair," he chuckled. "Your brother called me yesterday." I waited. "He wants to renegotiate the annual volume agreement." "Okay." "He thinks we were overpaying." "Were we?" "No." I smiled. "What did he offer?" "He wants lower unit pricing with a higher minimum purchase." I frowned. That doesn't sound like him. "It wasn't. He had some consultant's model?" "I didn't say anything," Frank continued. "I told him the same thing I told you 2 years ago. Your volume fluctuates too much to take that minimum." "What did he do?" "He said he'd think about it." "Then he probably will." Frank laughed. "You know, I didn't realize how much of this stuff you handled until he started calling me." I didn't answer. That sentence stayed with me. A few weeks later, Kevin called again. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Where's the old vendor exception list?" "What do you mean?" "The one you made. The one that shows which suppliers will accept alternate payment terms." "It's in the shared drive." "I can't find it." "Search for vendor exception matrix." I did. "It's under operations, then procurement, then 2022 archive." He paused. "How do you remember that?" "Because I made it." He laughed. "Right." Then his voice changed. "You know, Tyler said we're rebuilding all that." "Okay, he wants a new system." "Fine. The old one worked." "Then keep using it." "I don't think he wants us to." "Then don't." There was another pause. "Mark, can I tell you something without you getting mad?" "Sure. We're making mistakes." I looked at the ceiling. Everybody makes mistakes. Not like this. I didn't ask for details. I knew where this was going. "Kevin, you're not asking me to come back, are you?" "No." "Good. I just wanted you to know. I appreciate it." We hung up. That was the first time I understood that leaving wasn't the same as disappearing. People still remembered who had built the systems. They just couldn't rely on me anymore, and that was exactly what I had intended. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't withholding information. The documentation existed. The systems existed. The training existed. I had left everything in place. The difference was that nobody was automatically solving problems for them anymore. Tyler had wanted the authority. Now he had it. Authority came with consequences. The first serious problem came 6 months after I left. Midwest Fabrication called Mercer because a delivery dispute had escalated. Tyler apparently believed the customer's contract required them to accept a shipment regardless of delivery timing. It didn't. There was a clause I had negotiated years earlier after a completely unrelated incident. It allowed Midwest to reject certain deliveries if the shipment missed a specified production window. Tyler didn't know about the clause. He sent the shipment anyway. Midwest rejected it. The freight came back. The company lost almost $30,000 between transport, handling, and expedited replacement costs. Dad called me that night. "Did you know about the clause?" I sat in my apartment and stared at my laptop. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell Tyler?" "Because nobody asked me." "You could have mentioned it." "Dad, I'm not involved in operations anymore. You're still part of the company. As an owner, not as an operator." He sighed. "This is ridiculous." "What is?" "You sitting on information that could help us." "I'm not sitting on anything. It's in the contract. You know what I mean." I rubbed my forehead. "Dad, if Tyler wants to run the company, he needs to read the contracts. He's learning." "Then let him learn." Dad hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward. Part of me felt guilty. Another part of me knew that if I kept rescuing them, nothing would ever change. I had spent years making my brother look more capable than he was by solving problems before they reached him. If I continued doing that from outside the company, I would be recreating the same situation. So, I made a rule for myself. If someone asked me a factual question, I'd answer it honestly if I was legally and contractually able to. But I wasn't going to volunteer solutions. I wasn't going to call suppliers. I wasn't going to intervene with customers. I wasn't going to quietly fix things and then pretend I hadn't. That rule made me uncomfortable at first. Then it became liberating. My consulting work grew slowly. I hired a part-time accountant after 6 months because I hated bookkeeping. Eventually, I rented a small office and a shared workspace. There was nothing impressive about it. 1 room, a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard. But when I put my company name on the door, I stood there longer than I expected. Nobody in that building knew my father. Nobody knew Tyler. Nobody cared about the Mercer family. They cared whether I could solve their problems. That was enough. I started sleeping better. I started going to the gym again. I saw friends I'd neglected while working 12-hour days. I realized how much of my life had revolved around anticipating Mercer emergencies. There were evenings when I would sit on my couch and realize I'd gone 6 hours without thinking about the company. At first, that felt wrong. Eventually, it felt like freedom. Then I received an email that changed everything. It came from an old Mercer employee named Sarah Mitchell. She had worked in finance for 11 years and had left shortly after Tyler took over. The subject line was simply, "You should see this." The email said she had recently found an archived copy of a leadership presentation from before my role changed. She had noticed that the current version contained several claims that weren't accurate. She didn't accuse Tyler of anything directly. She just said, "I thought you should know." Attached was a PDF. I opened it. It was a presentation I'd never seen before. Tyler had presented it to the investors 3 months after becoming president. Slide after slide described the company's turnaround. The logistics system was described as Tyler's operational restructuring initiative. The procurement changes were described as leadership-driven supplier optimization. The customer retention program I'd built was presented as a proactive account management strategy developed under Tyler's direction. My name appeared twice, once in an organizational chart as operations advisor, once in an appendix listing historical employees. I stared at the screen. The dates were what bothered me. Every initiative had started before Tyler had taken operational authority. Some had started before he'd even joined the relevant meetings. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. I called Sarah. "Where did you get this?" "I saved it before I left." "Why?" "Because I thought it was weird." "Why are you sending it now?" She hesitated. "Because I saw the new company presentation last week." "What's different?" "They've changed the history again." I leaned forward. "How?" "They've removed you from most of it." I felt my jaw tighten. "Did you save that too?" "Yes." She emailed it. I opened both presentations side by side. The differences were subtle. That was what made them dangerous. Tyler wasn't deleting everything. He was adjusting language, changing implemented by operations to implemented by leadership, changing mark identified to management identified, changing specific dates, removing names, adding his own name to initiatives that had existed before he became responsible for them. It was history rewritten 1 sentence at a time. Sarah said, "I always thought he was just taking more credit than he deserved." "So did I." "This is different." "Yeah." "What are you going to do?" I looked at the 2 PDFs. "Nothing." She sounded surprised. "Nothing?" She sounded surprised. "Nothing? Not yet." "Why?" "Because I don't know what I'm looking at yet." That was true. I had evidence that Tyler was exaggerating his role. I didn't yet know how far it went. More importantly, I didn't know whether exposing it would accomplish anything. If I stormed into my parents' house waving old presentations, they'd probably accuse me of bitterness. Tyler would say the wording was subjective. Dad would say we'd all contributed. I knew how this family operated. Facts mattered only when they were convenient, so I stayed quiet. I started keeping copies of everything I legitimately received. I didn't hack into anything. I didn't ask anyone to steal documents. I didn't secretly record conversations. If someone sent me something voluntarily, I kept it. If a former employee told me something, I wrote down the date and context afterward. If a public business filing contained information, I saved it. I wasn't building a revenge file. At least that's what I told myself. Then another former employee contacted me. This time it was Mike, a warehouse supervisor who had retired. You hear about the Riverside account? He asked. No. Tyler lost it. I sat up. Riverside Components had been one of our most difficult customers. I'd spent almost a year rebuilding that relationship after a billing dispute. Lost it how? They moved to another distributor. Why? Wrong pricing, wrong delivery commitments. Nobody checked the old contract. I closed my eyes. Did they tell Mercer? They told Tyler, and he blamed purchasing. I wasn't surprised. Mike, why are you calling me? He laughed quietly. Because you were always the guy who actually listened. I'm not there anymore. I know. Then don't pull me back into it. I'm not. I'm just telling you what I see. We talked for 10 minutes. Before hanging up, he said something that stuck with me. Your brother isn't bad at business, Mark. He's bad at knowing when he doesn't know something. That was exactly right. Tyler was smart. He was hardworking when something mattered to him. He could sell. He could negotiate. He could inspire people. But he had spent years confusing visibility with competence. And because everyone around him rewarded confidence, he had never developed the habit of saying, I don't know. By the end of my first year outside Mercer, I had built a modest consulting practice. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I had 7 recurring clients and enough income to hire 1 full-time employee. I was proud of it. Then my father invited me to dinner. I almost declined. Mom insisted it was just family. I went. Tyler arrived late. He was wearing the same kind of expensive casual clothes he'd always worn when he wanted to look successful without appearing to try. He kissed Mom on the cheek and sat down. Dad poured wine. For 20 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Then Dad said, Mercer is considering expanding into Pennsylvania. I nodded. That's good. Tyler looked at me. We're evaluating a warehouse outside Pittsburgh. Okay, it would be a major step. Sounds like it. He smiled. You don't have any thoughts? I took a sip of water. You didn't ask me to evaluate it. Mom gave me a look. You don't have to be difficult. I'm not. Tyler leaned forward. I'm actually asking. I put my glass down. What's the projected inventory requirement? He hesitated. We're still modeling it. What's the customer concentration? We have a few anchor accounts. How many? 3 major ones. What percentage of projected revenue? He glanced at Dad. We haven't finalized that. I nodded. Then, I don't have enough information. Tyler smiled. See, this is why I said you'd be hard to work with. Dad laughed softly. Mom joined him. I didn't. I wasn't offended. I was watching. Tyler had just admitted that he was making a major expansion decision without the information I would have considered basic. Nobody else at the table seemed concerned. How are you doing? Mom asked me. Good. Really. Your business. Growing. We're proud of you, Dad said. I looked at him. I believed he meant it. That made everything more complicated. Thanks. Tyler nodded. Good for you. Then he said, almost casually, you know, if you ever want to come back, there's always a place for you. I looked at him. No, there isn't. His smile faded. What? There's a place for me if you want someone to clean up problems you created. That's different. Mom stiffened. Dad said my name. I stood up. I'm going home. Nobody stopped me. The next morning, Tyler sent me a text. You didn't have to embarrass me last night. I stared at it for a while. Then I replied, I wasn't trying to embarrass you. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, you don't understand what leadership requires. I typed a response and deleted it. I could have said plenty. Instead, I wrote, you're right. Then I put my phone down. I didn't know it then, but that conversation was the last time I tried to convince Tyler of anything. From that point on, I stopped correcting the narrative. I stopped defending myself to relatives. When someone asked what happened at Mercer, I said, they changed the leadership structure, and I left. Nothing more. The less I explained, the more interestingly, people started asking questions. Former customers would tell me things. Former employees would send me documents. Sometimes they weren't even trying to help me. They were simply confused by something Tyler had said and wanted to know whether their memory was wrong. I never encouraged them to gather information. I never asked for confidential records, but I kept what came to me legitimately. One document in particular caught my attention. It was a vendor proposal from 2021. It listed the procurement optimization project by name. The project manager was me. The approval email was from Dad. Tyler wasn't copied. The project had been completed nearly a year before Tyler became president. Yet in a recent investor presentation, Tyler had described it as the foundation of his procurement strategy. I opened another file, then another. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. but I still didn't act. I knew enough about business to understand that accusations without context can destroy credibility just as easily as lies can. I needed to know what Tyler had actually told investors, not just what I suspected. That opportunity came unexpectedly when one of my consulting clients asked me to review an acquisition target. The target company used one of the same investment firms that had backed Mercer. During due diligence, I saw a familiar name on a list of portfolio executives, Tyler Mercer. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. A week later, an investment analyst who knew me from years earlier called me. "This is going to sound weird," he said, "but can I ask you something about Mercer?" "Sure." "How involved were you in the turnaround?" I paused. "Why?" "Because Tyler describes it as a leadership turnaround that he personally directed." I looked at my office wall. He was involved. That's not what I asked. I didn't answer. He continued. "I'm looking at historical materials, and some of the dates don't line up." My heart started beating faster. "What dates?" "Several initiatives appear to have been completed before Tyler was responsible for them. Maybe he was involved before the formal transition." That's what he said. I leaned back, and the documentation doesn't support it. Silence. "I'm not asking you to say anything you shouldn't," he said. "I just want to understand the history." I told him the truth. Not everything, just enough. I explained that I had managed operations for years, and that several of the systems he was describing had been built while I was responsible for them. He asked if I had documentation. Yes. "Can I see it?" Not without understanding why. He respected that. Fair. We ended the call. I sat in my office afterward and realized the situation had changed. This wasn't just about family recognition anymore. Tyler had been presenting a version of the company's history to people whose decisions affected the company. If that version was materially inaccurate, it could have consequences far beyond my feelings. Still, I wasn't going to become obsessed. I kept building my own business. I bought better office furniture. I hired a second employee. I took weekends off. I started running again. My life got bigger. That's the part people don't understand about revenge. The best thing I did wasn't plotting, it was living. Every month I spent less time thinking about Mercer. Then, one Tuesday morning, Sarah called me. Her voice was different. "You need to look at something." "What?" "The new Pennsylvania expansion proposal." "Why?" "Why? Because your brother used your old inventory model." I sat up. "How do you know?" "I was sent a copy by someone still inside." "Don't send me anything confidential." "It's already been sent." My email notification appeared before she finished speaking. I opened the attachment. The model was familiar, too familiar. The structure, formulas, assumptions, even the naming conventions were mine. But there was something else. The projected warehouse expansion relied on an inventory turnover assumption I had specifically warned against 3 years earlier. I had written a memo explaining why that assumption was dangerous. Tyler had apparently used the same number in the new model. I read the proposal twice. Then I noticed the signature page. Under Strategic Development Lead was Tyler's name. Under Operational Framework was a statement saying the model was based on the company's established methodology developed under current leadership. I stared at that sentence. My hands were completely still. I finally understood what was happening. Tyler wasn't just taking credit for old work. He was using systems he didn't fully understand to make new decisions. And because everyone believed he had created the systems, nobody was questioning him. I opened the old memo. My warning was dated 3 years earlier. I had predicted exactly the problem his model was now creating. I printed both documents and placed them side by side. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I started making a folder, not a revenge folder, a facts folder. Every document had a date. Every document had a legitimate source. Every claim had something behind it. I didn't add rumors. I didn't add gossip. I didn't add private information, only things I could verify. I created a timeline. I wrote down when each system had been developed, who had approved it, when Tyler had joined the relevant discussions, and when he had later described it as his own. By midnight, the timeline was 14 pages long. I looked at it and felt strangely calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even trying to get my family back. I was simply documenting reality. 2 weeks later, Mercer announced the Pennsylvania expansion publicly. Tyler gave an interview to a local business publication. He talked about how he had transformed the family company and positioned it for regional growth. The article called him a second-generation operator with a modern vision. I read it once and closed the browser. Then my phone rang. It was Frank, the supplier from Illinois. "Mark?" "Yeah. I need to ask you something." "Okay. Is your brother actually running that Pennsylvania project?" "Yes." Frank sighed. Then somebody needs to stop him. I sat up. Why? Because he's negotiating the wrong way. What do you mean? He's committing to volume your company doesn't need. Are you sure? I'm looking at his proposal right now. I asked what he meant. Frank explained that Tyler was trying to lock Mercer into a long-term purchase agreement based on projected demand from the new warehouse. The problem was that the projected demand depended on 3 customer contracts that hadn't been finalized. If those contracts didn't materialize, Mercer would be obligated to buy inventory it couldn't move. Did you tell him? I asked. Yes. What did he say? Frank laughed bitterly. He said I didn't understand his growth strategy. I closed my eyes. Did he sign? Not yet. Then let him decide. Frank went quiet. You really mean that? Yes. Okay. We ended the call. Yes. Okay. We ended the call. I sat alone in my office. The old version of me would have called Dad immediately. I would have explained the risk. I would have asked him to stop the deal. I would have spent the next 48 hours fixing a problem that wasn't mine. Instead, I opened the fax folder and added 1 page. I wrote the date. I described the proposal. I noted that the underlying customer commitments were not finalized. Then I closed the folder. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad because for the first time, I understood that my family hadn't just chosen Tyler over me. They had chosen a story over reality, and eventually, reality collects its debts. It just doesn't always collect them immediately. The problem with facts is that they don't care whether you're ready for them. They don't care if you're angry, embarrassed, vindictive, or trying desperately to preserve a family relationship. They simply sit there and wait. 3 weeks after Frank called me about the Pennsylvania expansion, I got another call, this time from my father's CFO, Elaine Porter. Elaine had worked for Mercer for 15 years. She wasn't family, which was probably why I trusted her more than most of my relatives. Mark, I need to ask you something. Sure. Did you build the original inventory model? I paused. Yes. The one Tyler is using for Pennsylvania? Parts of it. She exhaled. That's what I thought. What's wrong? The model assumes a turnover rate we haven't achieved in 3 years. I know. Tyler says you've been overly conservative historically. I leaned back. Did he say that? Yes. What does the current forecast assume? She told me. I pulled up my old files and checked the numbers. The projected demand required those 3 unsigned customer contracts Frank had mentioned. If even one fell through, Mercer would be carrying substantially more inventory than it could comfortably support. Has Tyler signed the supplier agreement? I asked. Not yet. Then I can't tell you what to do. I'm not asking what to do. I'm asking whether the model is sound. No. Silence. Can you put that in writing? I asked. Why? Because if you're asking me professionally, I want to make sure you understand that I'm not involved with Mercer anymore. She sighed. I understand. Then yes, the model is too aggressive. That's what I thought. We ended the call. 2 days later, one of the 3 customers Tyler had been counting on postponed its expansion indefinitely. The projected demand vanished overnight. The supplier agreement, however, did not. Tyler had signed it the previous afternoon. Mercer was now committed to purchasing inventory based on demand that no longer existed. I found out from Frank. He signed, he said, and now he's furious. At who? Everybody. That became the first real crack. It wasn't catastrophic by itself. Mercer could absorb the mistake, but it tied up cash at exactly the wrong moment. The Pennsylvania warehouse build-out was already consuming capital. The new inventory sat in storage. A second customer delayed its commitment. Then a third asked to renegotiate pricing. Suddenly, Tyler's expansion strategy looked very different from the confident presentation he'd given investors. Dad called me again. We have a problem. I didn't answer immediately. What kind? Cash flow. I knew. How bad? Not terrible yet. Then you have time. Can you come in? I looked at my calendar. No. Mark, Dad, I'm not employed there. You're still an owner. Then send me the financial statements. He hesitated. We'd rather discuss it in person. Why? Because this is family. I closed my eyes. That's exactly why I don't want to discuss it in person. He didn't respond. Dad, if you want me to review something as an owner, send me the information an owner is entitled to see. I'll look at it. You sound like a lawyer. I'm trying not to sound like your son. The silence on the phone was painful. Finally, he said, I'll send it. He did. I reviewed the statements that night. The company wasn't collapsing, but the warning signs were obvious. Inventory was climbing faster than sales. Accounts receivable had stretched. The Pennsylvania expansion had absorbed cash. The supplier agreement created another obligation. Operating expenses were rising because Tyler had added management positions and consulting fees. None of those decisions was automatically disastrous. Together, they were dangerous. I made notes. I didn't send them to Dad. I kept them. A week later, Tyler called me. "You reviewed the numbers." It wasn't a question. "Yes. What do you think?" "You know what I think." "I want your opinion." "Then ask me as an owner." "I'm asking you as my brother. That's the problem." He went quiet. Then he said, "You know what everybody thinks?" "No. They think you're waiting for me to fail." I looked at the ceiling. "Everybody who?" "Dad, Mom, some of the management team." "Do you think I'm waiting for you to fail?" "I think you want to be right. I think you want to be right." "I considered that. I want you to understand the business you're running." "I do." "Then you don't need my opinion. You really believe you're the only person who knows how this company works?" "No." "It sounds like it." "Tyler, I spent years making sure nobody had to be the only person who knew how it worked. I documented the systems. I trained people. I built procedures. If you're struggling, it's not because I hid information from you." He didn't answer. "You're the president," I continued. "You wanted the job. You got it." His voice became colder. "You sound bitter. Maybe you should ask yourself why." He hung up. I didn't hear from him for another month. During that month, Mercer lost Riverside Components permanently. One of the warehouse supervisors resigned. A supplier tightened credit terms. The Pennsylvania project was delayed. The company's outside investors requested a management review. Tyler responded by becoming more visible. He gave another interview. He talked about temporary growing pains. He blamed market conditions. He said the company was recalibrating. What he didn't say was that several of the problems were directly connected to decisions he'd made. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell anyone I had predicted it. I kept working. My consulting firm had grown to 11 clients by then. I hired another analyst. We moved into a larger office. I was making more money than I had made in Mercer, but that wasn't the important part. The important part was that I was finally sleeping at night. Then Elaine called again. "The investors want a meeting." "With who?" "Management." "With who?" "Management." "And including Tyler?" "Obviously." "Why are you calling me?" She hesitated. "Because they asked about the history of the operational systems." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth." I sat back. "What truth?" I sat back. "What truth?" "That you built them." My chest tightened. "What did they say?" "They asked for documentation." "Did you give them any?" "Only what was already in the company records." That was enough. The records had survived because I had never deleted anything. The original project files were still there. Approval emails were still there. Vendor correspondence was still there. My name was attached to work because I had never expected anyone to erase it. I didn't need to defend myself. The evidence had been sitting quietly in the company's own systems for years. The investors requested a leadership review. Tyler was furious. Dad called me. "They're questioning the management structure." "Okay, they want to know who actually runs operations. They have the records." "Mark, what?" "I need you to help." I thought about all the times I'd heard that sentence. Help with what? "Come back temporarily." "No, just until we stabilize." "No, you could save the company." I looked at the wall in front of me. "Dad, I already did." He went silent. "You just didn't know it." I hated saying that, but it was true. The company survived because I had spent years building systems that could survive without me. That was the irony. The very systems I'd created to make myself unnecessary were now the reason Mercer could continue operating after I left. Dad finally said, "I didn't realize how much you were doing." I closed my eyes. "I know. I'm sorry." Those two words hit harder than I expected. I wanted them years earlier. I wanted them in the conference room. I wanted them when I was 27 and fixing a supplier crisis at midnight. I wanted them when Tyler stood in front of employees and described my work as his strategy. Now they sounded different. Not meaningless, just late. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "But it doesn't change what happened." "I know, and I don't know if I can trust you again." He didn't argue. That mattered. "I understand," he said. "The investor meeting happened without me. Tyler presented first." According to Elaine, he spent almost 40 minutes explaining the Pennsylvania strategy and defending the company's recent performance. Then one of the investors asked a simple question. "Who developed the inventory methodology you're using?" Tyler said, "It's an evolution of our internal system." The investor asked who originally designed it. Tyler apparently paused. Then he said, "Our operations team." "Who specifically?" Tyler said my name. It was the first time he had publicly attached my name to the system in years. The investor followed up. "Was the Pennsylvania forecast reviewed by him?" Tyler said no. That answer apparently bothered them more than anything else, because the model he had used was based on assumptions I had documented as risky years earlier. The investor asked why the person who had built the underlying system hadn't been consulted. Tyler reportedly said, "Mark is no longer involved in day-to-day operations." The investor replied, "That's not what I asked." Tyler had no good answer. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the story from Elaine and later from Dad. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The investigation expanded. They reviewed customer retention programs. They reviewed procurement agreements. They reviewed operational systems. They compared Tyler's presentations with historical documentation. The differences were impossible to ignore. Tyler hadn't fabricated the existence of the initiatives. He had done something more subtle. He had positioned himself at the center of them. He had changed Mark developed into leadership developed. He had described my work as a company-wide initiative under his direction. He had presented my supplier negotiations as part of his procurement strategy. He had used my forecasts as evidence of his planning. The problem was that the dates didn't cooperate. Emails showed I had completed some projects before Tyler had even been involved. Approval chains showed my name. Vendor communications showed me negotiating directly. Customer emails showed me handling accounts. Employee testimony matched the records. It wasn't one smoking gun. It was a mountain of ordinary facts. That made it devastating. Tyler couldn't explain every document away. He could only say the company had been a team effort. And that was true. But the more he said it, the more obvious it became that his previous claims had gone much further than teamwork. Then came the moment that finally broke his credibility. The investors asked him to explain the Pennsylvania inventory model. It was the same model I built years earlier, modified with the aggressive assumptions I'd warned against. Tyler presented the numbers confidently. He explained projected turnover, supplier volume, and expected demand. Then an investor asked him how the model accounted for customer-specific order variability. Tyler said it used historical averages. The investor asked which historical period. Tyler gave a range. The investor asked why that range excluded the 2 years with unusually low turnover. Tyler said those years weren't representative. Then, the investor asked why the model included a seasonal adjustment that only applied to one of Mercer's older product categories. Tyler said it was part of the company's established methodology. The investor looked at the printed document. Who established that methodology? Tyler said, "Our operations group." Who? Mark originally built parts of it. Then why is the methodology being used outside the assumptions under which it was designed? Tyler didn't know. There was silence. Finally, the investor asked, "Do you understand this model?" Tyler said yes. Then explain the adjustment. He couldn't. Not precisely. He started talking about strategic flexibility. The investor stopped him. "That's not an answer." Tyler looked toward Dad. Dad didn't help him. For the first time, Tyler had nowhere to hide behind confidence. He had claimed ownership of something he didn't understand, and now someone was asking him to demonstrate that understanding. He couldn't. The investors suspended the Pennsylvania expansion and ordered an independent review of the company's operations. Tyler was removed from direct control while the review continued. Dad resigned from the board shortly afterward. Mom stayed on the financial side temporarily. I was asked to attend a meeting as a minority owner. I almost refused. Then I decided I wanted to see it through. The meeting was held in a hotel conference room downtown. Dad, Mom, Tyler, Elaine, 2 investors, and outside counsel were there. I sat at the end of the table. Nobody gave a speech. Nobody yelled. The documents were stacked in front of everyone. One investor began with a simple statement. "We're not here to determine who deserves emotional credit for the company's history. We're here to determine what happened." That sentence made me respect him. They went through the evidence chronologically. The delivery system, the supplier agreements, the customer retention plan, the inventory model, the receiving workflow. Each time the records showed the same pattern. I had done the underlying work. Tyler had later presented it as part of his leadership. When they showed the investor presentation where Tyler had described the logistics system as his initiative, Tyler said, "I was responsible for implementing it." Elaine immediately responded, "You weren't." Tyler looked at her. "I oversaw the team." After Mark had already built it, he said nothing. Then they showed an internal email from me to Dad. dated 14 months before Tyler became president. In it, I described the exact logistics model Tyler had later claimed to have created. Tyler stared at the page. I never said I personally wrote the software. You said you developed the system, the investor replied. There's a difference. Tyler's jaw tightened. Fine. Another document, a supplier email. My name, another. A customer recovery plan. My name, another. A procurement agreement. My name. The room became quieter with every page. My mother finally started crying. I didn't look at her. I wasn't trying to punish her. I just couldn't carry her emotions for her anymore. Dad kept his eyes down. Tyler looked exhausted. Then the investor asked the question that ended it. Tyler, do you believe Mark's contributions were intentionally minimized in these materials? Tyler rubbed his face. I don't know. That's not the question. He stared at the table. Maybe. Why? He didn't answer. Why? The investor repeated. Tyler finally looked at me, because if I wasn't the person driving the company, I wasn't going to be the person running it. There it was. Not a confession of fraud, not some dramatic villain speech, just one sentence that explained everything. I looked at him. You could have just done your job. He shook his head. You don't understand. No, I said quietly. I understand perfectly. He looked away. The investors removed Tyler as president. He retained his ownership stake but lost operational authority. My father stepped away completely. The board brought in an interim executive from outside the family. The Pennsylvania expansion was canceled. The company renegotiated the supplier agreement. They sold excess inventory at a loss. It hurt. Mercer lost money. Employees were scared. Some people left, but the company survived. And that was important to me. I had never wanted it destroyed. I had wanted the truth to stop being buried. After the meeting, Mom asked if we could talk. We sat in a small coffee shop near the hotel. She cried again. I failed you. I looked down at my coffee. You didn't mean to. That doesn't make it better. No. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that. Because I thought if I did good work, eventually you'd see it. She covered her face. We should have. Yes. She nodded. I thought you were strong enough to handle being overlooked. I looked at her. That was the problem. She cried quietly. I'm sorry. This time I believed her. But forgiveness isn't the same thing as returning to the way things were. I told her that. I don't hate you, I said. But I can't go back. She nodded. I understand. Dad apologized too. His apology was less emotional and more painful. We sat in his truck outside his house. He said, I thought Tyler needed the opportunity more than you did. I stared through the windshield. Why? Because you always seemed like you'd be okay. I laughed softly. Dad, I wasn't okay. I was just quiet. He looked down. I know that now. I nodded. I wish you'd known then. Me too. Tyler didn't apologize immediately. Months passed. He disappeared from the family group chat. He stopped attending dinners. He sold part of his ownership stake to pay off personal debts. His professional reputation took a hit, though it wasn't destroyed. He still had skills. He still knew people. He still had skills ability. But the aura around him was gone. People who had once assumed he understood everything now asked questions. He had to earn trust instead of inheriting it. Eventually, he sent me an email. It was 4 paragraphs. He admitted that he'd convinced himself that because he had brought in customers and represented the company, the success belonged to him. He admitted that he gradually stopped distinguishing between what he'd contributed and what the company had accomplished while he was there. He said he was sorry for minimizing me. I read it twice. I didn't answer for 3 days. Then I wrote back, I appreciate you saying it. I don't know what our relationship looks like from here. He replied, I understand. That was all. We didn't suddenly become close again. We didn't hug at Christmas and pretend nothing happened. Real life doesn't work that way. Some wounds close without disappearing. Mercer eventually stabilized under outside leadership. The company became smaller but healthier. The new president kept many of the systems I'd built, which was oddly satisfying. Not because my name was attached to them, but because they worked. That's all I'd wanted in the beginning. My consulting business continued growing. 2 years after I left Mercer, I had 23 recurring clients and a team of 6. I wasn't a millionaire. I wasn't driving some ridiculous sports car. I had a comfortable house, a business I respected, and enough freedom to take a Tuesday afternoon off without asking anyone's permission. One afternoon, I visited the old Mercer warehouse for the first time since the board meeting. I was there because Elaine had invited me to see the renovated operations floor. I walked through the receiving area and noticed the old scheduling board was still on the wall. The system had been upgraded, but the basic structure was mine. I ran my fingers over the edge of the board. Elaine smiled. Still works. Good. She laughed. You really don't need anybody to tell you anymore, do you? I looked around the warehouse. Employees were moving pallets. Trucks were loading. Phones were ringing. The company was alive. Not because of Tyler. Not because of me. Because dozens of people had kept showing up and doing their jobs. No, I said. I don't. Before I left, I stopped by my father's old office. It was empty now. The desk was gone. The walls had been repainted. There was nothing there that belonged to my family. For some reason, that felt right. I realized that my greatest revenge hadn't been exposing Tyler. It hadn't been watching him lose his title. It hadn't been seeing the investors discover the truth. Those moments mattered, but they weren't the real victory. The real victory was that I had finally stopped measuring my worth by whether my family could see it. They had spent years deciding which son was the leader, which son was the face, which son deserved the applause. I had spent years trying to convince them I deserved it too. Eventually, I realized I didn't. I had built things. I knew what I had built. The people who mattered knew, and the people who didn't know weren't entitled to spend the rest of my life convincing me otherwise. I still talk to my parents. The relationship is different. More careful, more honest. My mother and I have lunch once a month. Dad occasionally calls for business advice, although now he starts by asking whether I'm available as a consultant instead of assuming I'm coming to fix something. Tyler and I speak occasionally. We're not best friends. Maybe we never will be, but I don't hate him. I don't need to. He has to live with what he did, and I have to live with the years I spent allowing it. That's a more complicated kind of accountability than revenge. The last time I saw him, we were standing outside a restaurant after our mother's birthday dinner. He said, "You know what the worst part was?" I asked what. I actually thought I was good enough. I looked at him. "You were good at some things." He laughed. "That's not what I expected you to say. You were good at sales. You were good with people. You were good at getting investors excited. You didn't need to be me." He looked down. "I know that now." "Good." He nodded. "Do you think you could ever trust me again?" I took a breath. Maybe, but trust isn't something you get because you're sorry. It's something you build by doing different things consistently. He nodded. Fair. Then we went our separate ways. I drove home that night thinking about the sentence my father had said years earlier. "You should be proud of your brother." I finally understood why it had hurt so much. It wasn't because Tyler had been chosen. It was because I had spent years believing that being chosen was the reward for being useful. It isn't. Sometimes the people closest to you will misunderstand your value. Sometimes they'll give someone else credit because that person is louder, more charming, or easier to celebrate. Sometimes you'll help build something and watch another person stand in front of it while everyone applauds them. You can't control that. What you can control is whether you keep standing behind them. I stopped. I removed myself from the equation. And the funny thing is, Mercer didn't disappear without me. Tyler didn't become a monster. My parents didn't suddenly become villains. The business didn't collapse overnight. Reality simply became visible. Without me quietly fixing every problem, decisions had consequences. Without my family protecting Tyler's image, his limitations became apparent. Without me explaining myself, the records spoke, and once the truth was finally visible, nobody had to believe me. They just had to read the dates. That was the most satisfying part. I never had to destroy my brother's career. I never sabotaged the company. I never leaked anything. I never hacked a computer, stole a document, threatened anyone, or manufactured evidence. I didn't have to. Tyler had spent years building a reputation on top of work he didn't fully understand. Eventually, someone asked him to explain the foundation. He couldn't. That was enough. My life today is quieter than it was at 30. I prefer it that way. My company is mine. When a client succeeds because of a process we built together, I know exactly what my role was. When something goes wrong, I fix it because I'm responsible, not because I'm afraid my family will be disappointed. I still keep copies of the old Mercer documents, not because I need them anymore. I keep them because they're a reminder of who I was before I learned the difference between loyalty and self-erasure. Sometimes I open that old 14-page timeline. I look at the dates. I remember the nights, the phone calls, the warehouse lights, the supplier negotiations, the customer crises, the spreadsheets, the stupid little problems that seemed so important at the time. Then I close the file. I don't feel angry. I don't feel victorious. I just feel grateful that eventually I walked away. because the day my family chose my brother, I thought I'd lost the thing I'd spent my adult life building. What I actually lost was the need to keep proving that I had built it, and once that need was gone, I finally had room to build something that belonged entirely to me.